Have you ever noticed how the people who seem to have their lives together are the ones who worry the least? While you're lying awake at 3 a.m. catastrophizing about tomorrow's presentation, they're sleeping peacefully. While you're checking your phone every 5 minutes for validation, they're actually living their lives. While you're paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice, they're making decisions and moving forward. Here's what they know that you don't. Worry is not preparation. It's not protection. It's not even rational. It's a mental prison you've built for yourself, and you're the only one with the key. You've been taught to believe that anxiety is responsible, that overthinking is thorough, that imagining worst-case scenarios is somehow keeping you safe. But look around. Look at what this mindset has given you. Are you happier? Are you more successful? Are you living the life you actually want? Or are you living in constant fear of the life you might lose? There was a man who figured this out over 400 years ago, long before social media existed to amplify our insecurities, long before the modern world convinced us that we needed to optimize every moment of our existence. His name was Michel de Montaigne, and he discovered something revolutionary. The secret to a good life isn't knowing everything or controlling everything. It's knowing what you don't know and being perfectly comfortable with that uncertainty. Montaigne wasn't your typical philosopher. He didn't write grand theories about the universe or create complex systems of thought. Instead, he did something far more radical. He studied himself. He observed his own mind like a scientist studying a fascinating specimen. He noticed his contradictions, his changes in mood, his shifting opinions, and instead of trying to fix them or hide them, he embraced them. He realized that consistency is overrated, and that being human means being beautifully, chaotically complex. But here's where Montaigne's insight becomes life-changing for you. He understood that most of our suffering comes not from what actually happens to us, but from what we imagine might happen. He once wrote that his life had been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never occurred. Sound familiar? How many nights have you lost sleep over problems that never materialized? How many opportunities have you missed because you were too busy worrying about failure to actually try? This is the trap that modern culture has set for you. You've been conditioned to believe that if you just think hard enough, worry long enough, plan obsessively enough, you can control the outcomes of your life. But Montaigne saw through this illusion. He realized that the need for certainty is actually what creates uncertainty in your mind. The more you try to predict and control the future, the more anxious you become about all the variables you cannot predict or control. So what did Montaigne do instead? He developed what might be the most liberating philosophy ever conceived. He embraced a simple question that changed everything. Que sais-je? What do I know? Not what should I know? Or what do I think I know? But what do I actually, truly know for certain? And the answer, he discovered, was beautifully freeing. Very little. Think about the last time you were consumed with worry. Maybe it was about a job interview, a relationship, your future career, your social status. Now ask yourself Montaigne's question. What did you actually know for certain about that situation? Strip away the assumptions, the predictions, the catastrophic thinking. What facts did you have? Probably very few. Most of your anxiety was about imagined futures, not present realities. This is where Montaigne's approach becomes practical and powerful. When you stop pretending to know things you don't know, when you stop trying to control things you cannot control, something magical happens. You become free to respond to what actually is, rather than what might be, free to make decisions based on available information rather than imagined catastrophes, free to live in the present moment instead of an anxious future that exists only in your mind. But Montaigne went even deeper. He realized that our obsession with being consistent, with having all the answers, with presenting a perfect image to the world, is actually what makes us miserable. He wrote about his own contradictions without shame. One day he felt confident, the next day insecure. One moment he was generous, the next selfish. Instead of seeing this as a flaw to be fixed, he saw it as the beautiful complexity of being human. This is revolutionary because it means you can stop performing. You can stop pretending to have it all figured out. You can stop exhausting yourself trying to be the same person in every situation, trying to have the perfect opinion about everything, trying to never make mistakes or show weakness. Montaigne gave you permission to be human, to be inconsistent, to be uncertain, and to find peace in that reality rather than anxiety. The practical application of this philosophy is where everything changes. Instead of asking, what if this goes wrong? You start asking, what do I actually know about this situation? Instead of imagining worst-case scenarios, you focus on present facts. Instead of trying to predict outcomes you cannot control, you prepare for the actions you can take. Instead of seeking certainty, you become comfortable with uncertainty. This doesn't mean becoming passive or careless. It means becoming strategic about where you direct your mental energy. Montaigne wasn't lazy or irresponsible. He was incredibly productive precisely because he wasn't wasting energy on imaginary problems. He could focus on real challenges because he wasn't distracted by invented ones. Here's what happens when you adopt Montaigne's approach. That job interview you were dreading becomes an interesting conversation with another human being. That social situation you were overthinking becomes a chance to connect authentically. That decision you were paralyzed by becomes a simple choice between available options. That criticism you were terrified of receiving becomes just information you can use or discard. The people around you will notice this shift. You'll stop being the person who needs constant reassurance, constant validation, constant confirmation that everything will be okay. You'll become the person who's okay with not knowing, who's comfortable with uncertainty, who can make decisions without needing to control all the variables. Some people will find this intimidating because it highlights their own anxiety. Others will find it magnetic because confidence in uncertainty is incredibly attractive. But here's the most powerful part of Montaigne's philosophy. When you stop trying to control everything, you actually gain more control over the things that matter. When you stop wasting energy on imaginary problems, you have more energy for real solutions. When you stop seeking certainty, you become more adaptable, more resilient, more capable of handling whatever actually happens. Montaigne called this belonging to oneself. It means your peace of mind doesn't depend on external circumstances. Your self-worth doesn't fluctuate with other people's opinions. Your sense of security doesn't require controlling outcomes you cannot control. You become internally stable while remaining externally flexible. This is why everything starts to go well when you stop worrying. Not because bad things stop happening, but because you stop creating additional suffering through your imagination. Not because life becomes predictable, but because you become comfortable with unpredictability. Not because you gain control over everything, but because you gain control over yourself. The worry-addicted will tell you this is naive. The anxiety-prone will insist that you're being irresponsible. The control-obsessed will argue that you're giving up. But you'll know something they don't. You'll know that you're finally free from the exhausting mental gymnastics of trying to predict the unpredictable, free from the prison of needing to know everything before you can act on anything, free to live your actual life instead of the imaginary life in your head. So I challenge you now, for the next week, every time you catch yourself worrying, ask Montaigne's question, what do I actually know? Separate the facts from the fears. Notice how much of your anxiety is about things that haven't happened and may never happen. Practice being comfortable with uncertainty instead of fighting it. Are you ready to stop being a prisoner of your own imagination? Are you ready to trade the illusion of control for the reality of freedom? Are you ready to discover what happens when you finally stop worrying and start living? The choice is yours, but choose quickly, because every moment you spend worrying about tomorrow is a moment you're not living today, and Montaigne would tell you that today is all you actually have.